There is a person in your life right now who smiled when they heard things were not going well for you. Not a stranger, not an enemy you can name and account for. Someone close, someone who sat across from you at a dinner table, who congratulated you when things were good, who calls themselves your friend or your colleague or your family. Someone whose face you can see clearly when you close your eyes. Someone who, when the news of your setback reached them, felt something shift inside their chest that was not grief and not concern and not the clean emotion of sympathy. It was relief, quiet, warm, private relief. Maybe followed immediately by guilt about the relief. Maybe not followed by guilt at all. You have felt this about someone else. Do not skip past that. Before this becomes entirely about the people who feel it toward you, sit for a moment with the fact that you have been on the other side of this experience too. Someone in your life stumbled, failed, fell short of something they had been reaching for. And something in you, beneath the performed sympathy, beneath the genuine kindness you also felt, something shifted in a direction that you would not describe out loud. This is not a confession of moral failure. This is an acknowledgement of one of the most consistent, most universal, and most carefully hidden features of human psychology. A feature so common that the German language gave it its own word, schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from the misfortune of others, the quiet satisfaction that lives in the shadow of someone else's difficulty. Most conversations about this phenomenon stop at naming it. They describe it as a flaw, a weakness, something to be ashamed of and corrected, and then they move on, leaving the actual architecture of it unexamined, which means the people experiencing it toward you remain mysterious. Their behavior remains confusing. Their specific relationship to your success and your failure remains something you feel but cannot explain. This is the conversation that actually matters, not the surface acknowledgement that schadenfreude exists. The deep examination of why it exists, who specifically feels it most intensely, and toward whom, what it reveals about the specific relationships in your life. And most importantly, what it means for how you move through the world if you understand it clearly rather than simply knowing its name. Because once you understand the full psychology of why some people secretly enjoy seeing you fail, two things happen simultaneously. The behavior stops being a mystery that hurts you and becomes a pattern you can read accurately. And the people who are doing it stop having the power to destabilize you because you understand exactly what is driving their response to your life. You see the mechanism, and mechanisms, once visible, lose most of their power over you. Let us begin at the root. Human beings are comparative creatures at a neurological level. This is not a cultural imposition. It is not the product of a competitive society or a materialistic culture or the particular anxieties of modern life. It is a feature of the brain that predates civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. The constant, automatic, largely unconscious process of evaluating our own position relative to the people around us. This comparative process served an essential evolutionary function. In a world of scarce resources and group-dependent survival, knowing your relative position in the social hierarchy was critical information. It determined your access to food, to mates, to protection, to the basic resources of continued existence. The individual who accurately understood their standing relative to others was better positioned to make the decisions that survival required. The individual who overestimated their position made fatal errors. The individual who underestimated it failed to compete for resources they needed. The brain that survived and reproduced was the brain that tracks social comparison obsessively. And that brain is the brain you are walking around with right now. In a world where the scarcity that drove the original development of comparative instinct no longer operates in the same way, the hardware remains fully functional, running its original program in a completely different environment. And in this environment, what the comparative brain tracks is not access to food or physical safety, but the social currency of the modern world. Status, respect, achievement, romantic success, financial position, professional advancement, the visible markers of a life going well. Every time someone in your proximity advances in any of these dimensions, the comparative brain registers it, files it, adjusts the internal calculation of relative position, and generates an emotional response to that adjustment. When the adjustment is upward for you, the response is positive. When it is downward, the response is negative. This is automatic. It requires no conscious intention. It operates below the level of deliberate thought. And it happens in everyone, including the people who would be most horrified to know it was happening in them. This is the first and most fundamental reason why some people secretly enjoy seeing you fail. Your failure temporarily reverses an upward adjustment that your success had previously created. It brings the comparative calculation back toward equilibrium. And equilibrium, for the comparative brain, registers as relief, as comfort, as the quiet pleasure of a pressure that has been reduced. The person experiencing this response is not necessarily a bad person. They may be a genuinely loving person who is simultaneously experiencing a neurologically generated reaction they have no conscious control over. The two things coexist. The love is real, the relief at your failure is also real. And the confusion this creates in the person experiencing it is part of why it is so rarely examined honestly. But there is a more specific and more targeted version of this phenomenon that goes beyond the general background noise of comparative psychology. There are people in your life for whom your success is not simply a general upward pressure on the comparative calculation. It is a specific, personal, and deeply felt challenge to something they have staked their identity on. Understanding who these people are and why your success specifically destabilizes them is the most practically important part of this entire conversation. The first category is the person whose identity is built on being ahead of you. This is more common than it appears and more specific than the general comparative dynamic. These are people who, at some point in their relationship with you, established a mental framework in which they were the more successful, the more capable, the further along of the two of you. This framework may have been accurate at one point. It may have been accurate for a long time. It may have become a foundational element of how they understand themselves, not just relative to you, but in the broader landscape of their self-concept. When you begin to move in a direction that challenges this framework, something very specific happens in their psychology. It is not simply the general discomfort of someone else's success. It is the structural threat to an identity that has been built around a specific comparative position. The friend who was always the more successful one, the sibling who established early that they were the ambitious one, the capable one, the one who was going places, the colleague who positioned themselves as your senior, your mentor, the person whose trajectory yours was measured against and found lesser. For these people, your success is not just positive news about you, it is negative information about them, because their identity was comparative in its construction. It required a specific relationship between your position and theirs to remain coherent. And when that relationship begins to shift, the identity itself comes under threat. The emotional response to identity threat is not mild. It is one of the most powerful motivational forces in human psychology. People will do extraordinary things to protect the coherence of their self-concept. They will dismiss evidence, reframe facts, unconsciously undermine people whose progress threatens the narrative they depend on. And they will experience a genuine, if shameful, relief when the threat to their identity is temporarily removed by the failure of the person who was beginning to challenge it. The second category is the person who has made their peace with not trying. This is perhaps the most poignant version of the phenomenon because the suffering it involves is entirely self-generated. These are people who once had ambitions that were not so different from yours, who once looked at the kind of life you are working toward and believed at some level that it was possible for them too, and who at some point made a decision, consciously or otherwise, to stop reaching for it. The decision came with a story about why it was not realistic, about why the circumstances were not right, about why the people who succeed in that direction have advantages they do not have, about why the attempt would have failed anyway. The story is necessary because human beings cannot simply abandon ambitions without an explanation. The ambition does not disappear. It requires an account of why it is no longer being pursued. And the most available and most psychologically comfortable account is this: it was not really possible, not for someone like me. In these conditions, with these obstacles, the game was rigged in ways that made my decision to step back not a failure of courage or persistence, but a realistic assessment of an unfair system. This account works. It functions. It provides a degree of psychological peace until someone with a comparable starting position, with comparable obstacles, with no more obvious advantages than they had, begins to succeed at the thing they decided was not possible. Your success does not simply make them feel left behind. It retroactively dismantles the story they built their peace around. It suggests, with the brutal eloquence of demonstrated fact, that the decision to stop trying was not a realistic assessment. It was a choice, and the consequences of that choice are now visible in the comparison between your trajectory and theirs. The relief they feel at your failure is therefore not about you at all. It is about the story. Your failure repairs the story. It restores the plausibility of the account they need in order to be at peace with their own decisions. This is why this particular category of person is often not consciously aware of what they are feeling. The feeling is too close to an admission they cannot afford to make. The third category is the person operating from a scarcity framework. Some people move through life with a deeply held, often unconscious belief that success is a finite resource, that there is only so much of it available, that the world operates like a table with a limited number of seats, and every seat taken by someone else is a seat unavailable to them, that your win, in some meaningful sense, costs them something. This framework is factually incorrect in most domains. Success in creative work does not reduce the supply of success available to other creative people. Professional achievement in one person does not diminish the professional achievement available to others in the same field. With the occasional exception of zero-sum competitive situations, personal fulfillment is not a scarce resource that depletes with use. But the scarcity framework does not operate on factual assessment. It operates on deep psychological conditioning, often laid down in early environments where resources genuinely were scarce and where one person's gain genuinely did mean another's loss. The sibling who got more attention. The family where financial stress made every expenditure a competition. The early social environment where status was distributed in strict hierarchical proportion and rising in it genuinely did require someone else falling. The person who internalized this framework in those early environments carries it into every subsequent context, regardless of whether the context is actually scarce or not, and they experience your success with the same visceral anxiety they would have experienced a genuine threat to their resources in the original environment, followed by the same visceral relief when the threat is removed. Understanding this does not require you to excuse the behavior or to protect them from the natural consequences of it, but it does require you to stop taking it personally in the way you have been. Because it is not personal, it is not about you. It is about an old map being applied to a new territory, and the person holding the old map cannot see the actual landscape clearly enough to respond to it accurately. The fourth category is the person who invested in a version of you that your growth has made obsolete. Relationships create expectations, not just hopes about what the future will bring, but specific, deeply held models of who the other person is and how they fit into the relational landscape. These models are investments. They require time and attention and emotional energy to build. They become part of how the person understands their own life, their own social position, their own identity in relationship to the people around them. When you grow significantly, when you change direction, when you develop in ways that alter the terms of the relationship substantially, something happens to the person who was invested in the previous version of you. Their model becomes inaccurate. The investment they made in understanding and relating to who you were loses value, and the relational position they occupied relative to the old version of you may not exist in relation to the new version. The friend who knew you when you were struggling and built their relationship with you partly around being the more capable, more stable, more together of the two. The family member who processed you as the one who needed guidance and built their role in your life around providing it. The colleague who understood the dynamic between you in terms that your growth has made unrecognizable. These people often do not consciously wish you harm, but your continued growth is a continued cost to the investment they made in who you were, and your failure, particularly a failure that returns you to something closer to the version of you they understood and knew how to relate to, produces a relief that is inseparable from the recovery of something they felt they were losing. This is one of the loneliest aspects of genuine growth and genuine success. The people who love the previous version of you most deeply are sometimes the ones who are most destabilized by the emerging version. Not because they do not love you, because love was built around a specific person, and the specific person is changing in ways that the love has not yet found a way to follow. The fifth category is the person whose competition with you was never acknowledged. Some of the most intense competitive dynamics in human relationships are the ones that exist entirely underground, never named, never discussed, never acknowledged by either party. They live beneath the surface of what appears to be a friendship or a collegial relationship or a family dynamic, powering behaviors and responses that make no sense if the competition is not seen. These unacknowledged competitions begin in various ways, sometimes in early childhood or adolescence, when two people of similar age and similar abilities move through the same environment and are naturally compared by the adults around them. Sometimes in professional settings, where two people at similar levels are invisibly being evaluated against each other for advancement opportunities that only one of them will receive. Sometimes in social groups where status is distributed informally and the relative positions of group members are in constant, unspoken negotiation. The person engaged in this underground competition with you has likely never said the word competition in your presence. They may have never even said it to themselves. But the tracking is continuous. Your progress is registered, your setbacks are registered, and the emotional response to each is the full response of a competitive dynamic, experienced but unexplained. When you fail, this person feels what a competitor feels when their opponent stumbles. The pleasure of a gap closed or a lead extended, the relief of pressure reduced, the satisfaction of a position defended, none of which they can acknowledge or process directly because the competition itself has never been named. This produces a particular form of behavior in your presence, an over-solicitousness around your failures, a quality of interest in your difficulties that seems disproportionate to the relationship, a specific brightness in the eyes when bad news is delivered, quickly masked but not quickly enough. You have seen it. You registered it even if you could not explain it. Now you can explain it. Now let us talk about what all of this means for how you live and move and build in the presence of people who carry these responses to your success. The first thing it means is that your success will always produce friction in some of the relationships closest to you. This is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something has gone right. The friction is not the problem. It is the expected consequence of exceeding the expectations that the people around you held for you. And exceeding expectations is the precise definition of the thing you are trying to do. This does not make the friction painless. It makes it interpretable. There is a profound difference between experiencing the withdrawal of someone who was never able to celebrate your success and experiencing that same withdrawal as a personal rejection that you should do something about. The first requires processing and acceptance. The second requires changing your behavior in ways that will compromise the very growth that is producing the friction. One is grief for what the relationship was. The other is self-sabotage disguised as loyalty. The second thing it means is that you need to become extremely selective about who receives the information of your progress and your plans and your aspirations. Not because people cannot be trusted in some general sense, because the specific people in the categories described above will process your shared ambitions through the lens of their own comparative anxiety, their own identity protection, their own scarcity framework. And the result of that processing will not be support. It will be a combination of conscious and unconscious responses that introduce friction and doubt into the space where your momentum needs to build. Share your progress with people who have demonstrated through repeated and consistent behavior that your success genuinely increases their sense of possibility rather than threatening their sense of position. These people exist. They are rarer than you would like them to be, but they exist, and the relationship you have with them is one of the most valuable resources in your life. Protect it, invest in it, recognize it for the exceptional thing it is when you have found it. The third thing it means is that you need to develop a specific relationship with the experience of being celebrated by people whose celebration feels somehow off. You know the feeling, the congratulation that arrives with a quality of delivery that does not quite match the words. The praise that contains a note you cannot name but can hear clearly. The encouragement that produces in you, paradoxically, a feeling of being slightly less safe rather than more. Trust that feeling, not as evidence of paranoia, as evidence of accurate social perception. You are detecting a real signal. The incongruence between the surface performance and the underlying emotional reality is genuinely there. The people who produce this feeling in you are the people whose comparative anxiety is most acute, whose identity is most invested in your relative position, whose scarcity framework is most activated by your progress. They are not your enemies necessarily, but they are not your allies in the way that safe celebration would indicate. They are people who are working very hard to perform a response they do not fully feel. And that performance, however well-intentioned, is costing them something that will eventually produce a bill. Usually at a moment when you are most in need of the genuine support the performance suggested was available. The fourth thing it means is perhaps the most important and the most difficult. You need to find a way to hold compassion for the people in these categories without allowing that compassion to become the reason you make yourself smaller. Because the most common response to the discomfort of knowing that your success threatens people you love is to moderate the success, to stay small enough that the comparative pressure does not become unbearable, to achieve at a level that preserves the relational peace, to be careful not to outpace people whose identity has been built around being ahead of you or level with you, to protect the story of people who need your failure to maintain the account of their own choices. This impulse is not weakness, it comes from genuine love. The desire to protect people you care about from the pain that your growth produces in them is not a small thing. It is a form of loyalty, a form of care. But it is ultimately a form of sacrifice that serves no one. Because making yourself smaller does not actually resolve the comparative anxiety of the people around you. It simply delays and displaces it. The person whose identity requires you to be behind them will find a new way to feel behind once you have moderated your progress to accommodate them. The person whose story requires your failure to stay plausible will find the story challenged by something else once you have provided the failure they needed. The scarcity is in them. The threat is in their framework, not in your success. Your moderation does not cure the disease. It simply temporarily manages one of its symptoms while introducing a new and more serious one. The symptom of a life not fully lived. The compassion you owe the people who secretly enjoy your failure is not the compassion of moderation. It is the harder and more genuine compassion of continuing to grow while refusing to make your growth a weapon against them, of succeeding without contempt for those who cannot celebrate it, of moving forward without looking back at the people left behind with anything other than a sincere wish that they find their own way to the freedom that comes from building an identity that does not depend on your position. That is the real work. Not understanding the psychology of those who cannot celebrate you. Understanding it clearly enough to stop needing their celebration. To stop organizing your behavior around producing responses from people whose internal framework makes the response you need impossible for them to give. The people who secretly enjoy your failure are not your problem. They are their own problem. Living in a framework that makes your success their loss and your failure their relief is an exhausting and ultimately self-defeating way to move through a life. The punishment for it is built into the experience of it. Your work is simply to see it clearly, to call it by its correct name when you feel it in a room, to protect the space of your growth from the interference of people who cannot afford to see it succeed, and to find and invest in the relationships, rarer but real, where your success is someone else's genuine joy, where the comparative instinct has been transcended by a love large enough to celebrate without keeping score. Those relationships exist. Build toward them. They are worth more than everything else in the social landscape of your life combined, because they are the only relationships in which you can be fully known, fully seen in your ambition and your effort and your failure and your progress, without the constant background radiation of someone else's competitive anxiety shaping how the truth of you is received. Everything else is noise, painful noise sometimes, confusing noise, the kind of noise that can make you doubt yourself if you do not understand what it is. But noise nonetheless. You now understand what it is.